Yo, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. I'm your boy Numbskull, and today I've got quite the tale to tell you. This is going to be the story of not only the first time I ever did mushrooms, but my first time on a real psychedelic, period. This is going to be a real banger, and I hope you guys enjoy. This happened a while ago, so bear with me here. Let's jump in. So this happened junior year of high school. I was like 17 and I had really started getting into hallucinogens a year or so prior. I hadn't yet found a source for psychedelics yet, however, so my experience was comprised of dissociatives and deliriants. One day, however, finally happened. As I sat in my ex's bedroom, browsing through everyone's Snap stories, I found a certain individual who I didn't know all too well but had spoken to a time or two prior. He was quite the educated enthusiast and had posted that he had some shrooms in his possession. The good old days of Snapchat selling, am I right? Anywho, I leapt at the opportunity immediately and hit him up asking if he could sell me an eighth. He said absolutely, and after some haggling, we settled on like $35, I believe it was. He said I could come pick up at his place a bit later that day, so that's exactly what I did. My parents actually drove me over there. As I said, they've always been quite understanding of my experimentation. It was a quaint little farm on the outskirts of town. We were only there a short while. As my parents talked to my newfound plug's legal guardian, who had been walking from his barn as we pulled up, it was either his pops or grandfather, I don't remember which, I strolled up to his door and made the transaction. 3.5 grams of some pretty white-stemmed, black-capped dried mushrooms in a mylar baggie, one side of which had a sort of window so I could observe the product. To this day, I haven't been able to identify the exact strain, but I'm sure if I put some effort in now, I could probably do so. After collecting my bounty, I had my parents grab me a Hershey bar and we drove home. I wasted no time running to my room to examine the goods. Fantastic. I put it off for a bit, as my ex would definitely have not been happy if she knew I was doing them without her. She was a bitch though, so I quickly decided I didn't really give a flying fuck what she thought. I opened the baggie and consumed the mushroom on top of pips off the Hershey bar. They were none too bad as far as taste went. After dumping the remaining powder out of the bag onto the final pip and consuming it, I went to my other room, the room in which I slept, and laid in my bed with the lights off, listening to music via earbuds and waiting on shit to kick. It did indeed kick. After an unknown amount of time, say probably 30 to 45 minutes, I began getting these spiritual feeling 2D geometric dog head shapes forming a border around the edges of my vision behind my eyelids, kind of dancing in a rectangular shape. This is when I knew that I had finally found my psychedelic experience that I had been searching for. I observed them until the current song, of which I do not remember, ended, and then stood up to truly take in this then unfamiliar feeling for the first time ever. It felt great, like I had an energy long gone finally pumped back into my veins. I walked into my parents' bedroom and stared into the mirror for a bit. I just kept thinking to myself, I feel like a beach boy, due to my stature and long, wavy, blonde-haired appearance. I felt better about myself staring in that mirror in that moment than I had ever felt before. I felt like I finally understood that this is the way God made me and the way that I'm meant to be, and I was content, to put it simply. After a while of this, I sat on my parents' bed near my dad and decided I needed a drink of water, which my dad offered to get for me and did. When he brought it back and handed it to me, I caught a very strong whiff of something I felt like I'd never smelt before. It was coming from the water. I mentioned it to my dad and he asked me what it smelled like, and the only thing I could think of to describe it was, it smells like earth. The most pure, natural smelling smell you could possibly imagine. After taking that in, I finished the glass and decided I wanted to go outside and experience more of these earth smells that the world had to offer. So I did just that. The second I stepped outside, I caught the smell of wood shavings all over the porch my dog had pulled out of his house. I picked up a handful and felt them, letting them fall through my fingers as I squeezed them and brought them closer for another smell. They felt so natural, That's the only way I can think to describe it. I then threw a big scoop into the air like confetti, and it felt like forever until they hit the ground. Time felt slowed down tenfold, and I swear I could hear the wood shavings fluttering through the air. They sounded almost like wind chimes. It was a truly magical experience just watching and listening until the last one touched the ground again. It was so magical, I repeated this a few more times, and each time it was the same experience. After I got bored of that, something else caught my attention. The ground had this moving pattern repeating all over it. It looked like the shape of a snake mating pile, like the way they all slither in and out of each other, only there were no heads or tails, and it was simply a 3D texture covering the ground, if you know what I mean. I decided to walk further up my driveway. We lived in a hollow in the middle of the woods, and literally everything felt alive. More alive than I'd ever considered them before. The trees, the grass, the moss, it all felt so full of energy. I ended up sitting crisscross applesauce in the middle of our very long snaky driveway a slight ways away from the house. I decided to have a mental conversation with a particularly large tree. There were no words, but rather it felt as if we were communicating telepathically via a new language. Its language. It communicated in feelings and urges rather than true, mentally spoken thoughts. After a bit, I felt the rest of the nearby trees and grass and moss join in, and I communicated with the forest for quite some time. I really felt the Indian in me during this experience. I felt as if I were walking a path many of my ancestors had walked before me, and it felt almost like a rite of passage in a way. Like this was something I had needed to do for a long time, something I had longed for but couldn't identify until I was in the midst of experiencing it. It was truly something magical happening in my mind. Something I can't fully describe with words, something that you'd have to experience yourself to fully understand. Like I say, it's like I'm trying to describe color to a lifelong blind man. It's impossible. Can't be done. I called my friend Levi and did my best to describe it to him. He was also in search of a psychedelic experience, but wouldn't have his until I got my hands on blue gel tabs of LSD for the first time. But that's a different story. This call would turn out to be a bit of a mistake, not the call itself or speaking to Levi, but because I didn't tell him to keep it a secret. He was smoking with my ex's brother unbeknownst to me, and kinda accidentally ratted me out to my ex. I ignored her incoming calls and texts until the trip was over. I eventually walked back down to the house and went back inside for a bit, but I didn't stay long. I wanted back in and back outside. My mom, who was in the kitchen fixing food, asked me what I was doing as I headed back toward the door. I simply said, talking to the trees, and to this day I don't think she knows that I meant it, that I was speaking literally. I sat back on the porch and my dad followed me out to chill for a moment with me. I did my best to describe what I was feeling and experiencing, but he didn't truly understand what I meant. He couldn't. No one could, not without having been there themselves. I still want to take my dad on a psychedelic trip to this day, and one day I'm most certainly going to. After he went back inside, I went and had a conversation directly to my favorite giant moss patch not far from our door. It was something else, something truly spiritual, and something I simply can't describe to you. It was as if God himself was speaking directly to me through it. After it was done with, I felt an extremely strong urge to smoke weed. Unfortunately, I was out. I ended up going to my smoking room to scrounge for bits and pieces, and came up with a few grains of sand worth of bud. This simply wasn't going to do. I ended up calling my boy Will, and he was happy to come out and hear my experience and smoke with me. We ended up pulling his car up onto a flat clearing halfway down my gated driveway from the road, and sat there as I told him about what had happened and what I was feeling, and how I'd made a boo-boo telling Levi without warning him to keep it quiet. I was feeling a tad stressed at that point, but the second I inhaled some cannabis smoke, I immediately had this extremely unique feeling wash over me. I had no more worry, I didn't care what happened with my ex. I simply knew that everything would be alright for me no matter what. It felt like the most intense feeling of clarity you could ever imagine. I could see it all that was to happen and all that had already, all connected, and I could finally see my place in the world in a way I never had before and never would again. After a while, he left and I went back into my bedroom. Things got intense here. Another not negative per se, but rather too much. I had existential overexposure. I could see the world too clearly. I could see how small I was and how little everything truly mattered in the grand scheme of things. I almost crossed over into an ego death of sorts, but not quite. This is something not everyone experiences, and only ever on their first encounter with psychedelics if they do at all. I simply knew too much, understood it all far too clearly. I had the veil, the curtain that protects us all, protects our minds, from seeing the inner machinations and workings of the universe pulled back for a while, and I did not like it. No human mind could exist with that amount of clarity and understanding. I simply saw too clearly, if you know what I mean. It lasted a good 20 or 30 minutes, and I was afraid I'd be like that forever. That I'd always see this clearly and be stuck like that from then on. But then, finally, as drugs do, the molecule left my mind at peace and exactly as it were before this experience occurred. I have never forgotten what I saw that day, though, in that moment, and I know that I never will. It doesn't bother me, but if I ever really start dwelling on it heavily, I find it too much to bear once again. Ignorance is bliss, ladies and gentlemen. You don't know how true that statement really is. After the effects were mostly gone, I went and visited my ex at her apartment once again. We reconciled, but would never be the same. That didn't matter though, as I still knew I'd be just fine in the back of my mind. I was really there to smoke with Levi and discuss my experience, even if I didn't fully realize it in the moment. It was truly something out of this world. And that is going to be the end of the story of my first shroom trip and my first psychedelic experience ever. I know that I missed some details that I didn't want to, but if they all come to me later on, I'll revise this video. As for now, I leave you all with a statement echoed amongst those who know, a statement truer than any other you've ever heard before. Once the door is open, it never fully closes. Once you realize what that statement truly means, you'll know you've made it to a place not everyone dares to tread, and made it back in one piece to tell the tale to the world of what you saw, even if the only people who will truly understand what you mean are those who have walked the trail with you. Stay frosty, stay curious, and as always, stay safe out there. And I will of course see all of you in the next one. Peace!